Hey YouTubers, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to give a little update on the quarterly earnings from the big four tech companies and also talk a little bit about something that's hitting the headlines, as these four largest tech companies in America were taken to court last week for essentially getting too big for their shoes, and were basically accused of not giving a fair share for smaller companies to compete in the same spaces, as well as accusations that the companies are also using bullying tactics in order to drive smaller businesses out of business. But then again, this also gets a little bit controversial because it's easy to argue the pros and the cons, therefore leaving myself sitting on the fence, deciding whether it's a good thing that these companies are getting too big or whether the cons outweigh the pros. But at the end of the day, what we all really care about is how is all of this actually going to affect us? So during the intro video, why not hit the like button so that you help the YouTube algorithm to recommend this video to other people on YouTube. So before we jump into the big court case that happened on Wednesday last week, all of these four companies also announced their Q2 earnings last week. First of all, let's look at Amazon. Now they've managed to double their profits to $5.6 billion, which is pretty great seeing that they also spent about $4 billion on COVID-related costs. Now their total sales brought in only a mere $89 billion, which broken down brings us to $50 billion just from products that they sell, and then a further $39 billion that came from services such as AWS, their cloud services, as well as third-party seller plans. And then Apple. And just like in the standard Apple way, they had their best second quarter ever. But on top of that, they also announced that it's about time that they decided to take a cut out of their apple pie. And what I mean here is that they're actually announced that they're going to be doing their 5th stock split, which essentially means that every one stock of Apple stock that you own at say about $400, at the end of August, you will end up having 4 shares worth $100 each. Now the reason for doing this is just to really make it look a little bit more affordable for people to invest in the company. But these days, with fractional shares being so readily available, it doesn't really make much of a difference, especially to this younger generation that's starting their trading life on apps like Trading 212, which, by the way, if you want to sign up to an account, check the referral link down below and you can get a free share worth up to £100. And then we have Google, who actually reported their first sales decline ever. Now this came about after advertisers obviously decided to tighten up their wallets during the whole COVID pandemic. However, Google still managed to beat their earnings expectations for the quarter. And now finally Facebook, where they reported that Instagram had an 11% sales growth, which unfortunately is the slowest that they've ever seen since 2012. But again, they also smashed their quarterly earning expectations for this last quarter. Now obviously there were lots more information on the Q2 reports, but these were the highlights that interested me. Now essentially these reports chime into the main reason as to why this investigation happened last Wednesday. Because during this pandemic, all of these companies are still managing to thrive due to the dominance that they all have in the market respectively. So let's dive straight into the details of what I'm actually talking about. So last Wednesday, the heads of 4 of the largest tech companies in USA, Jeff Bezos from Amazon, Sundar Pichai from Google and Alphabet, Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, and Tim Cook from Apple, all had to put on half of their best suits in order to show the top half of their bodies via a WebEx chat with Congress. Now the big question I guess you have is, why are these 4 big tech companies having to testify in court? Well, for decades, the tech industry has been getting scrutiny over mergers, acquisitions, and potential anti-competitive, and potential anti-competitive behavior, all under the umbrella of antitrust laws. Now they're basically saying that the tech companies are getting too big and beginning to monopolize the market. And so the antitrust panel of the House Judiciary Committee are accusing the tech companies of doing unlawful things in order to continue to grow and eliminate the competition. Now, antitrust laws have been around in America for over a century, where it's been used to keep mega corporations across various different sectors such as oil, railroad, and finance from getting too big and powerful, which essentially broke down the richest figures in the world from the likes of the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. However, the laws put in place back then did not really work as well in this 21st century online business world. Now, I don't know about you, but when I initially saw this lineup, all I could think of is that Satya Nadella must be feeling a little bit left out when all the other big boys were going off to court without him. But Microsoft already went through an antitrust hearing about 10 years ago. Now, this is where the government accused Microsoft of making it difficult for consumers to install competitive software on Windows operated computers. Now, this ultimately led to Microsoft splitting the company, where one half would run the operating system, Windows, and then the other half will be in charge of the additional Microsoft software. Now, I guess this was also the turning point when Bill Gates decided to step down from CEO of Microsoft and started focusing more on his philanthropic work. And I guess I don't blame him. Going through multiple grueling court hearings is more than enough for one of the richest people in the world to decide that it's time to wash his hands of one of the biggest companies that he's helped to build since 1975. So I guess the government just feels that they have done their part with Microsoft already. So getting back to last week's hearing, this hearing was basically a pit stop for a year-long congressional investigation where smaller companies on the rise have been testifying against these big four companies since June 2019. Now, what was actually discussed? Well, I'm going to try and break down to you a 6-hour-long court hearing to about 10 minutes. So let's get started. First of all, Amazon with Jeff Bezos. Now, he probably had it the hardest, being the richest person in the world and his net worth increasing rapidly during this whole economic crisis. So they basically grilled him on how Amazon promotes its own products through Amazon Alexa, and the question came up about whether it prevents other streaming services from being on their Amazon Fire devices. But the largest accusation was whether Amazon scrapes data from their third-party sellers in order to sell competing products on their Amazon marketplace. Now, the court also had a testimony where a third-party seller compared Amazon of being like heroin, where the chairman of the committee asked Bezos, why on earth will one of your partners compare your company to a drug dealer? Now, Jeff Bezos defended himself, saying that they started only selling their own products and then opened the doors to third-party sellers, which actually increased the competition. But Bezos said that they are still investigating whether the data was scraped in order to compete against the third-party sellers, and they'll be continuing their investigations to get to the bottom of this. But technically, if we actually look into this, Amazon's biggest crime is making it so easy for people to sell to the masses of people all around the world, therefore allowing the non-experienced business owners to be able to run a business at a rapidly growing rate without the necessary background and experience to deal with such a situation. This therefore makes it very difficult for newer business owners to understand the industry thoroughly in order to know the best way to succeed within it. Now, at the end of the day, we need to remember that Amazon has not come about in the last few years and built this mammoth of a company. It has been slowly growing over 20 years to get to this point. So comparing them to individual third-party sellers is almost like comparing elephants to dogs. And at the end of the day, essentially everyone has their own choice, whether to sell on Amazon or not. Yes, Amazon does have a huge market share of the industry, but if you have a great product, there are lots of other platforms that you can use to sell your goods on. And so the old method is always there, to build your business slowly using any other platform that you want. But then again, at the same time, any law that can come into play that lets you take home more of a share of the profits that you can make on Amazon's amazing platform will always be beneficial to the smaller companies. Now on to Sundar Pichai from Google and Alphabet. Now he had to address questions about their relationship with China and also whether they compress conservative voices. Now there was a question specifically directed to Sundar asking if Google will be tailoring its features in order to help Joe Biden in the 2020 elections. To which Sundar replied that Google supports all campaigns and remain to be equal under the law, and that they approach their work in a non-partisan way. But it wasn't just politics. Google mainly had to defend themselves against adverts and search as well. And as Google has such a large dominance on the search and ads industry, the Congress wanted to know if they should be allowed to have that much power. As for instance, if a customer wanted to create a digital ad, they would need to go to a middleman such as Google Ads, where they would then need to bid for ad space on an ad exchange. And basically, the problem they stated was that Google owns all of these entities. And well, personally, in my eyes, rightly so that Google owns all of these entities required for ads on the platform, because they've spent years building this whole ecosystem. Now at the same time, every consumer and every seller has the option to not use Google. For instance, it's the same for physical stores as well. Now, I can easily set up a shop down the road in my local parade of shops, but I also know I'm going to do a lot better if I can open up the same shop in, say, Oxford Street. Now, the only problem here is that obviously rent and other costs is going to be much higher in a better shopping area. Now, the same applies here for Google Ads and search. Now, there are lots of other platforms out there, but if you want to use the best, then you need to pay up and join them. And at the same time, the whole talks about censoring information and having control on the bidding structure, well, this essentially is the essence of their business structure. But again, it's like the physical shops. I can go to my local newsagent and find a bottle of milk for maybe £2. But if I go to a larger supermarket, I can get the same bottle of milk for £1. So therefore, it's up to me if I'm willing to pay that extra £1 from the newsagent or not, which is essentially the same for the whole Google Ads market. And now, onto Facebook, where Zuckerberg talked about how much competition they have. But at the end of the day, Facebook has the same number of users as two of the world's largest countries. And so Congress had questions specifically about how Facebook decides to use this power. Specifically more around how they decide what is and what isn't allowed to be on the platform. Now, one of the directed questions was about how Donald Trump Jr. was taken off the platform because he put up something on the platform about the benefits of hydroxychloroquine. And the congressman simply just wanted to know why that happened. Which is when Zuckerberg quite calmly replied, "Congressman, first of all, to be clear, what you mentioned happened on Twitter." So it's hard for me to actually speak about that. But he then followed on to say that he can comment on what Facebook's policy were and that they prohibit content that would lead to imminent risk or harm. And so a statement stating that a proven cure for COVID, where there in fact isn't any, can encourage someone to go and take something that could end up with adverse effects. So in cases like that, Facebook would take those posts down. Now then the House grilled Mark even further around the grounds of releasing copycat products to scare off its competitors. In particularly, they directly accused Zuckerberg of using Facebook's camera product in order to threaten Instagram's founder, Kevin Systrom, to which Mark replied that he doesn't agree with the term threaten, as it was publicly known that Facebook was building their own camera app at that time. And finally, Apple. Now by this point, it felt like everyone got a little bit tired of grilling the other three, that when it came down to Tim Cook, they took it a little bit easier, as he was only really quizzed over the power of the App Store and also about the cut that Apple takes from its developers. But the main thing they really wanted to grill Apple on was whether Apple blocks third-party apps that compete with their own products, such as screen time apps that seem to mysteriously disappear from the App Store as soon as Apple decided to release their own screen time app. Now, to this, Tim decided to go down the route of stating how the App Store has grown from 500 to 1.7 million apps, and say that there is a fierce competition on the App Store, but Apple wants every app that they can get on the platform. Now, at the end of the day, out of the full 6 hours, all 4 CEOs would have been fully prepped by their team of lawyers to answer questions in such a specific way, especially for any questions that they were not sure about, which pretty much resulted in a unanimous answer where they all ended up replying, "Can we get back to you on that point?" Therefore, this hearing is definitely not going to be the last that we would have heard about this case. So I guess the question now is, what's actually going to happen after all of this? Well, basically the whole hearing is not a trial with a specific verdict as such. Like, they're not going to be able to convict any of these companies as being guilty. Instead, it's an opportunity for lawmakers to question these tech executives and gather evidence through testimonies, which they can then eventually use to lead a new legislation that can come into play to keep tech companies from growing too large and powerful. But as bad as it is that these companies already own a huge majority of our life and life decisions, the question I struggle to answer wholeheartedly is whether it is actually a bad thing. Because personally, as a consumer, I feel like that these companies are doing amazing things to make my life easier. I mean, Amazon makes it easy for me to shop and get things quickly. Google provides me with all the knowledge that I could ever want. Apple provides me with great products that I love using. And Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp just makes it so much more easier for me to communicate with my friends and family all around the world. But then on the flip side, the non-consumer side of me, the business side of me, does make me wonder whether it's worth setting up another business. And if I do, what business can I set up? And whether I can harness the power of any of these incredible platforms. But the uncertainty of this investigation and the ever-changing tech world always has me second guessing whether it's the right time or not to venture out into creating a new business. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video today, and make sure you comment below on your thoughts about all of this, because I know everyone has their own personal thoughts regarding each of these companies and generally around the whole tech conglomerate as well. But whether you comment or not, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and make sure you hit the bell button as well so you get notified when my next video comes out. And as always, remember to like, share and comment. See you in the next video. Bye.